And now we are ready for our first panel presentation, and this could be one of the most lively panel presentations of the entire conference. The topic of the panel is reining in the big bad wolf. We all know who the big bad wolf is.
I think so.
We all know who the big bad wolf is. Our panel moderator is State Representative Frank Ryan. Frank Ryan is a longtime friend of the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. As a matter of fact, before today, the last time we had somebody come in remotely to this leadership conference was back in, I believe, 2014, when Frank was literally walking across America from the Pacific to the Atlantic in order to raise funds to help children who were suffering from various disabilities. And he literally walked the whole way across the country, and he was, I think, somewhere in Arizona. And we brought Frank in at our dinner in order to lead the Pledge of Allegiance. He now is a state representative representing a portion of Lebanon County. And he's here in person today, along with our all-star reining in Governor Wolf, reining in the big bad wolf panel, Colonel Frank Ryan. Frank?
Loman and David, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. This is a topic that I would have never have believed would have been done a year ago, reining in the big bad wolf. But we've had a pretty interesting experience as a result of COVID-19, and I'm honored to join with my good friends, Representative DARYL, METCALFE, Representative Russ Diamond, and Attorney MARC SCARINGI, to talk about the topic. So DARYL, let's go ahead and get started with you to get your perspective on this. I really, again, appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, sir, and I appreciate the opportunity today to talk about reining in the big bad wolf, because we are in a fight for our liberties here in Pennsylvania and across America like we have never seen on American soil since the Civil War had occurred. We have Americans' rights being taken away, being violated. Never did I dream in my lifetime that I would have seen an elected official have the ability to issue a dictate and stop people from being able to go to work, to be able to put bread on the table for their family, or to be required to stay at home, or to have to wear a mask, or to have to limit the size of gatherings that influences their ability to have a wake or a wedding. Just outrageous violations of our constitutional rights have occurred. And last week, we received a decision from Judge Stickman in the federal courts to a case that I am a plaintiff in that suit. And we received an outstanding opinion, 66 pages written by Judge Stickman, where he made the declaration and he declared that Wolf's executive orders, Levine's orders, that ordered people to stay at home, that ordered people to shut down their businesses, that ordered people not to have certain size gatherings, either indoors and outdoors, that they were all unconstitutional. We received another victory this week as the governor attempted to get the court to issue a stay, and he made a motion for a stay. We received another order this week from the court, another victory in court on behalf of Pennsylvanians and Americans, really, that there was not going to be given a stay for this decision for Wolf's actions being unconstitutional, but that they would remain in place. We are going to continue this battle. Wolf is appealing the ruling, but the judge has said just what so many of us have said from day one, is this is America. This is land of the free, home of the brave. You're not allowed to order somebody to stay at home. You're not allowed to order somebody that they can't go to work to make a living and put bread on the table. That is an outrageous type of action. It should not be tolerated by anybody in the land of the free and home of the brave. Now, we need to rein this wolf in, and we are doing that from various exercises, various initiatives that we have in the legislature. The court case is outside of the legislature. I'm a plaintiff in that as a private citizen with a couple of other state legislators and some business owners. 4 counties were involved, and our congressman, Mike Kelly, was involved in that as a plaintiff. But we also, within the legislature, have initiatives that we have executed to rein in the big bad wolf. One, ultimately, is impeachment. And I have authored House Resolution 915. We need more co-sponsors for that. So when you look to your legislator and ask them what they're doing to stop Wolf from violating their rights, you need to demand that they sign on to the impeachment resolution, because ultimately that is the tool that's used to hold an elected official accountable. He's violated our rights. The federal court has said he violated our rights and agreed with us on that. We need to remove this man from office through impeachment. We also have another initiative that we've put forth, which is called a declaration of suspension. In our Constitution, Article 1, Section 12 gives power to the General Assembly only to suspend laws. It says, no power of suspending laws shall be exercised unless by the legislature or by its authority. A very short sentence, common sense, but the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, that is dominated by liberal, Democrat, activist judges, has said that that doesn't really mean what it says. Well, we need to reclaim that power that the people have given to their legislature on their behalf, and we need to suspend the emergency management law that Wolf is utilizing to violate our rights because he's claiming that it gives him more power than it really does. So suspending that law would actually help to resolve this problem and rein in the big bad wolf. We also have another initiative that many of us have been working on together, actually many initiatives. We have a lot of different pieces of legislation that we've been working on to reclaim the power that Wolf has taken away from the legislature through various executive orders. And one of those recent bills, we thought we'd be successful in overriding Wolf. House Bill 2787, I believe was the number, right, to allow parents to be able to go to their kids' sporting events because Wolf had said that they shouldn't, and many school districts were fearful of allowing that. Well, last week's court decision opens that up. School districts are now free under the most recent federal court decision that his actions were unconstitutional. They're free, school districts are, to go ahead and open those football games up again, as they should. But we were passing legislation as a backup for that in case Wolf tries to come back in with an appeal and tries to influence that with trying to get another judge to give a different ruling than what the Constitution would dictate. That bill should have been an easy override vote of his veto, but about 24 Democrats violated what they had previously voted and betrayed their constituents to side with Wolf. So ultimately the way to rein in the big bad wolf is for we the people to reclaim the power that we have as citizens in the United States of America. We do not have to tolerate any elected official that's violating our rights, and the way to do it is ultimately through a political rebellion to not stand for the dictates, to live your lives, to live as a free people once again as we are.
DARYL, that was extremely helpful. And Russ, you've taken that fight directly to the governor. Tell us what you're doing. I'm really interested, and I think you'll see a great working relationship that all of us have together in doing this. And my fellow Lebanon County-an, Russ Diamond.
Well, thank you so much, Frank. You know, my attempts to rein in the governor, the big bad wolf, began way back on March 16th when he shut down restaurants with about 4 hours notice. The very next day, I circulated a co-sponsorship memo for House Resolution 836, which would exercise the General Assembly's authority to terminate a disaster emergency, just as the law provides. Of course, you all know the story of that. I worked all spring and all summer getting people aboard, and finally, in June, I believe it was, or maybe it was the end of May, we finally passed that in the House, sent it over to the Senate. The Senate amended it, sent it back to us. We passed it again. And then, of course, the governor went to court, and the Supreme Court said, no, you have to get the governor's permission to go against the governor. My next battle in fighting the big bad wolf, and this is when I knew it was really political rather than practical. I had heard from one of our leaders that the SEIU union, which is a lot of government employees, that they were watching our every move on every inch of videotape that we had as House Republicans to try and catch us, violating some mandate or something like that. That night, I went shopping with my fiance, and I proudly posted on Facebook that I went shopping without a mask. And sure enough, the SEIU members came to my Facebook page, and they were like locusts. I mean, they were like locusts. But it was weird because at 11 o'clock at night, it was like somebody told them, well, punch out, your working day is over. So I knew then that this was becoming political. It was my team that discovered, by accident, we were given a couple anonymous tips, that Rachel Levine moved her mother out of a personal care home and into a luxury hotel. We confirmed that by having one of our team members actually call the luxury hotel and actually spoke with Mother Levine the next morning. When I tipped off the press asked about it at a conference, at a press conference, and she made that lame excuse, you know, oh, her mother's, you know, 95 years old and, you know, of sound mind, that sort of, well, maybe her mother ought to be Secretary of Health then, because she knew well enough that the danger was coming to personal care homes and long-term care facilities. I was also very involved in drafting the constitutional amendments that will be on the ballot, at least we think they're going to be on the ballot in May, for you, the people, to vote on 2 initiatives to actually stop the governor or any future governor from exercising this kind of power in the future by changing the way we handle resolutions like House Resolution 836, and by demanding that any governor in the future who declares a disaster emergency has to come to the General Assembly to get some sort of ratification of that disaster before it can go on any longer. I also have a constitutional amendment that is slated to be on the ballot next year to change the way we elect appellate court judges. That includes the Supreme Court and Commonwealth Court and Superior Court in Pennsylvania. Right now, we elect them on a statewide basis, and for the last 50 years, those seats have been dominated by people from Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And when you dominate your courts with those sort of people, you know what kind of rulings you're going to get. The one we just got, you know, on House Resolution 836, and the one we just got that totally trashed the election law in Pennsylvania. There are many ways that we have been trying to rein in the big bad wolf. But here's the secret. Tyranny only works on the governable. It only works on the governable. If you all get together en masse and say, no, we are all going to the high school football game, they're not going to be able to stop us all. I mean, seriously. People need to open up their businesses. They need to live life as free men and women and just rein in the big bad wolf, one individual at a time.
Russ, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to work with you on this. And now I'd like to introduce my dear friend, Mark SCARINGI. Mark and I have known each other for quite some time, when we were both in a prior life running for political office. And Mark has got an entirely different approach on this, and I think you'd enjoy hearing his perspective from a legal end of the great work you've been doing to restore our freedoms.
Well, thank you, Representative Ryan. I have been trying to rein in the big bad wolf since he first issued his business closure order on March 19th of 2020. I filed 2 lawsuits challenging, among other things, the statutory authority of the governor and the Secretary of Health to issue, among others, the business closure order and the stay-at-home order. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court denied our statutory and constitutional challenges in the Friends of Danny DeVito case. We have filed a petition for writ of certiorari before the United States Supreme Court, asking that court to reverse the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court will decide whether to accept our petition at its conference this coming Tuesday, September 29th. In the other case, Benner v. Wolf, we challenged all the orders, including the occupancy limits and the mask orders. Our amended complaint is currently pending the governor's motion to dismiss. His last brief in support of his motion is due this Wednesday, September 30th. So we are fighting the governor and the secretary in 2 courts, trying to stop all of their orders. But as you know, we've had some difficulty. We've had a difficult time of it. You cannot choose your judge. Representative Metcalfe has done a better job in the Western District. Unlike us, he drew a Trump-appointed judge, Judge Stickman, on September 14th, 2020, issued an order declaring the business closure and stay-at-home order and the congregate gathering limits to be unconstitutional. Now, the governor has appealed that case to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And as we continue to try to rein in the governor through the courts, there are some legislative changes that can be made to rein in the governor right now that, if implemented, may even stop the current orders. And I'm glad I've got all of these state representatives here. They've got to listen to what I have to say. They can't leave the stage here. Number one, And we talked about this, Representative Ryan, in the recent hearing in the Emergency Preparedness Committee that Representative Metcalfe had me appear before. Amend the Emergency Management Services Code. We lost our case before the PA Supreme Court because it found that the COVID-19 pandemic is a natural disaster like floods, hurricanes, and earthquakes, and that every square foot of Pennsylvania is a disaster area, including all of your businesses and all of your homes throughout the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Now, those are respectfully absurd legal conclusions, but they are now the law of the land in Pennsylvania. And I recently testified before the House Emergency Preparedness Committee and explained that by adding a short phrase to the definition of disasters, for example, by expressly exempting communicable diseases, epidemics, and pandemics, and stating that they must be governed under the Pennsylvania Disease Prevention and Control Law of 1955, we could remove the emergency code as the legal source for this or any governor's actions against communicable diseases. Recommendation number 2, amend the Disease Prevention and Control Law of 1955. Now, this is the state's quarantine law. This is the law the governor and Secretary of Health should have been following, should have been using, because this is the law that is expressly intended to be used to combat communicable diseases. The governor cited this law as providing him with the statutory authority, also in addition to the code. We challenged it because it actually does not authorize the executive orders that he issued. But the PA Supreme Court did not decide that question, so it's still an open issue. We said this law, according to its text, can only be used against individuals, not businesses, and only against individuals who are infected or who have likely been exposed to a communicable disease. Had the Pennsylvania Supreme Court actually analyzed this law, the appropriate law, it could only have concluded that it does not authorize the governor's orders because they were not so limited. The Wisconsin Supreme Court, in reviewing Wisconsin's very similar Disease Act, ruled that way, which supports our legal position. In short, when the next epidemic or pandemic makes its way into Pennsylvania, you want the governor and secretary to use the Disease Act, because that's the act intended to combat communicable diseases. The Disease Act is Pennsylvania's quarantine law, and it is much more restrictive on the governor and secretary of health's power. It only permits the government to act against the sick, not the healthy, which is what the governor and secretary did. So by its own definition, it would not have provided the authority for any of these orders in question. Now, a problem with the Disease Act is that it does not expressly include due process protections to those subjected to orders issued in its name, except for mandatory testing, even though the common law has provided these protections for hundreds of years. So any amendment to the Disease Act, we must add those due process protections to protect the people subject to it. There are some other changes that need to be made, but I don't have time to get into those now. But in short, eliminate the emergency code with its vast and unchecked gubernatorial powers as the legal source to combat communicable diseases, and then tighten up the actual Disease Act by adding, among others, traditional due process protections. If you pass these changes now, you might be able to stop the current governor's existing orders. But in any event, the changes need to be made to protect the liberty and freedom of the people of Pennsylvania moving forward.
And I think that's a great point now for me to bring into this kind of full circle as we get to it. And then we have a number of questions that we've received. When you look at the discussion that Mark just had, that I think is so particularly appropriate, it discusses passing bills, that we have in fact passed numerous bills to in fact put some degree of control on what this governor has done relative to his response for COVID-19, but he's vetoed them. And then shortly thereafter, he's come out with policy changes that would allow some degree of a modification that was some token gesture to the legislature and to the population about what needed to be done. So we think we need a concerted effort, in addition to all the 3 efforts that you've just heard, to look at it from a legal perspective as well, in terms of additional research that we've done with the Department of Justice, and most recently with the Attorney General, where we've provided information where there may in fact be civil and criminal remedies that we may be able to take advantage of in doing it. So part of the issues that I'm working on, and for those of you familiar with my background, I'm the CPA, I'm the financial person. We've got folks, DARYL and RUSS are more constitutional oriented. Mark, you're from a legal end. I've been saying for quite some time that the governor's draconian measures about shutting down the economy are going to lead us to insolvency, and we're there now. In mid-September 2020, we are now out of cash. If we did not get the $5 billion infusion from the CARES Act, we would in fact be negative $4 billion. We have $1 billion that we haven't yet allocated from the CARES Act funds. That $1 billion is basically the line of credit the Commonwealth is using to pay bills. The treasurer is obligated under the Pennsylvania Constitution to borrow the money necessary to meet those needs, and he now needs to borrow $4 and $5 billion by February of 2021. Under the Pennsylvania Constitution, that money must be repaid before any other bills are paid in the Commonwealth. So in reality, the treasurer and the Pennsylvania Constitution is dictating priorities, and what the governor's actions are doing is putting the legislature and the citizens of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania between a proverbial rock and a hard place, necessitating a massive tax hike of about 65% in the personal income tax rate, which would actually seal the fate on the Commonwealth's insolvency. I said 4 years ago we had 2 to 4 years to turn the financial ship around. With the great work in the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate, we bought 2 years worth of time. COVID-19 hit. The governor's draconian actions about shutting down the Commonwealth and taking our liberties without ensuring public safety has been problematic. Under Act 77, with Representative Seth Grove, the governor let it lapse into law, reopen the Open Records Office. I filed a series of right-to-know requests, and I agree with Mark completely under the Disease Prevention and Control Act, and I was honored that my appeal was upheld when the governor denied my access to information. And part of his response was that the data that they were making decisions on did not exist. That was important one. The second issue, the governor's ability to withhold information using the Disease Prevention Control Act as the basis for denying it, was denied, and the governor's staff and the Department of Health have been ordered to provide this information to us. Additionally, I've taken an action, as my dear friend Colonel Doug Mastriano said, state senator. He said the United States Marine Corps was founded in a tavern. Had COVID-19 been going on at the time we were founded, there wouldn't have been able to be a Marine Corps. We couldn't have gotten that many people in one-ton tavern at the time to allow it to be founded. But we were revolutionaries then, and we must remember that we took an oath of office to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So this past week, I took an action that I never thought I would do, and I filed articles of impeachment against Judge Wecht for, in fact, interpreting a constitution and laws in areas in which it was clearly unconstitutional, as well as other representations that he made during his run for office, in which the gerrymandering case was decided in a way in which the persons who voted for him knew that he was going to reopen this decision. We must recognize this as a fight that we must deal with, and I stand ready with that. So with that, let me talk to our panelists. We've had an interesting period of time. I think if we had talked to any of us at the beginning of 2020 and said this was going to go on, what do you think is what we should be telling our citizens and constituents when they're frustrated, when they see 25 members of the House of Representatives flip on a vote that they just made, as an example, to reopen sports events for citizens? How do we talk to them so they understand we're fighting hard and others are abandoning the cause?
Go ahead, Bill.
I think what we need to share with them is that what we shared earlier from Russ and Senator Mastriano, excuse me, need kind of a bottle of water up here with us, that ultimately you only have a free nation when the citizens are able to hold on to their own freedom. They can't elect people to office and expect the 253 legislators and the congressional representatives that we're the ones that ultimately are just going to hold on to what we need to hold on to as a free nation. That's a responsibility of all citizens. Every citizen has a duty to stand up for the Constitution and defend it. And when you see 24 Democrats violate their previous vote, betray their constituents to side with their governor because he's from their party, when he's abusing their people just as much as ours, people ought to be outraged in the streets over this. Instead, they're outraged over other things that they're creating out of fiction most often to create chaos in the streets in some of our urban areas now. People should be outraged in the streets across the state and nation because their freedoms have been stolen by this governor and other governors like Cuomo in New York. They need to stand up to these representatives. They need not to just shoot emails and make phone calls. They need to march on their legislative offices and demand that their legislators, Senate and House, start representing them in the process and stand up to this dictator named Wolf that we're supposed to rein in now. As I said, we have the impeachment resolution for Wolf. We have the impeachment resolution for Wecht. We have the declaration of suspension. We have colleagues that are afraid of their own shadow at election time that won't sign on to the declaration of suspension, even though they'd personally like to suspend that law. We need to have Democrats and Republicans joining together to stand up for the people of Pennsylvania. But the people of Pennsylvania have got to stand with us to demand that those legislators do that.
Russ, you've done a phenomenal job. I've been unbelievably proud of candidly, the changes to the Pennsylvania Constitution that you've proposed, and as well as the issue that you've done with House Resolution 836.
I agree.
How do you explain to people when you're dealing with this, the fight you had to do to pull that up? Because when it first got introduced, nobody thought it was going to come to pass, and you got it across the finish line.
Actually, when I first introduced that, when I first circulated the co-sponsor memo, to me it was just like, I was just like, this is just in case it gets bad. I mean, really bad. I never in my life imagined that we would actually vote on that in the floor. It's never been done in Pennsylvania before. But let me go back to something that DARYL mentioned and just kind of tie this together for the folks back home and why it's so important for individual citizens to act on their own to defend their own liberty, because we're hogtied as legislators. Look, we swore an oath to the U.S. Constitution and the Pennsylvania Constitution, but the Pennsylvania Constitution demands that we have a timeline to get things done in the legislature. I get so many calls from people who say, well, why can't you just go over and stop Wolf? Well, we don't have arrest powers, because if we did, I know DARYL would have been with me right there on the door, you know, hauling the guy off to prison. We don't have that kind of power. We have to follow constitutional guidelines for every single piece of legislation. And that's why somebody who can just issue executive order and play guessing games in front of the cameras every day at press conferences has an advantage over us. But the advantage you as a citizen has over us as legislators is that you have all the political power. Ours is very limited. We have two superpowers. We can legislate and we can appropriate. Everything else belongs to you. And that means going shopping without a mask, getting together with your family and friends, going to church, going to the high school football game. That's all up to you. Don't wait on us. Go out and do it all on your own, because we can only take a certain path to correcting what the governor does. And as DARYL talked about with House Bill 2787, some of those Democrats they're playing games over there. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, they were all in favor of, yeah, let's let the school districts go. And then, you know, one who voted for it got up and said, well, this is frivolous now, and switched his vote. And the House Minority Leader, Frank Dermody, he said in Penn Live yesterday, he said, well, I thought it was a good idea the first time, but the governor vetoed it. So I'm the Democratic leader, so I'm not going to go against the governor. They're dealing politically. You're dealing with real life, your events, your family, your church, your community. Go out and live as free people, because we have to take time to do what we do. But you can make a snap decision today to be free.
Mark, I need to you said something that really touched me when you said DARYL, when he did his action in the Western District, and you had one in Pennsylvania, that the judge that you get has an impact. And we've got just very limited time left. This idea of which judge handles a particular case is huge. Is there ever a point in time where it does not make sense to pursue something legally because you may get a judge that will be willing to introduce and do something that is not constitutional?
The short answer is yes. I think we've learned a little bit about that in this litigation, yes.
What would you recommend to people that are frustrated that we're not hitting the courts more frequently?
Oh boy, well, you've had great success in the Western District because you had a judge who truly understands the Constitution and the rights that it protects. Not all judges see things the same way, so it is important on how you craft the lawsuits and the courts that you file the lawsuits in, but you can't give up the fight. Courts eventually will change. The law does evolve through litigation, and so we're not going to give up the fight. We're going to keep challenging this governor in any court that will hear me until we win the day and win the issue, because it's that important for the people of Pennsylvania.
So I think it's important that everybody recognize that the four of us and the other members of the legislature that have been voting to reopen the Commonwealth, we're not going to give up. And to reinforce what Mark just said, the governor himself realized at the Commonwealth Court he might not be successful, so he used King's Bench authority in order to pull off something that actually hurt our constitutional rights. And so this entire segment, reining in the big bad wolf, should end on the note that the governor himself believes that this King's Bench authority makes it perhaps King Wolf instead of Governor Wolf. Thank you.
Good close. Very appropriate.
Right on time.